Hello and welcome back to Resolutionary Leaders. Today we have two incredible leaders, Ben Kleinman and Rich Cruz. They work together both with a podcast that has just hit its 31st episode. They have a blog and they have consulting business, all under the umbrella of Harmonious Workplaces. Welcome, Ben and Rich.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks a million.
So let's just dive right into how do you see the change? You've been in business for quite some time. You're well educated and you have degrees in, I think, organizational. Rich, what are you? You've got a master's in.
Yeah, so I have an MBA and then I have a master's of science in industrial organizational psychology. And then Ben.
Yeah, I just have a plain old MBA. So.
Oh, look at that. Oh,
plain old MBA.
Severely under-credentialed maybe for this conversation.
Kellogg? But, I don't think so.
But I try to make it up in silly jokes and bad dad jokes. So we'll go there.
Besides, yeah, I've got lots of bad parent jokes too, but all that foundation and stuff, I do think that the boots on the ground learning is the most valuable. So have a lot of that as well. And let's just talk about how the current climate in the workplace has shifted over the last 4 years. What are you seeing?
Yeah, the last 4 years have been tumultuous, right? So we're talking like post-pandemic. Is that during that?
I think so.
And
yeah.
I think the pandemic kind of just opened up a lot of wounds, and I think it's been a very rough ride. And everyone's had their own trauma through the pandemic and post-pandemic. It's just this different feeling that I'm experiencing when I'm working with people in the workplace. And I just want to understand your insights into that.
Yeah, for sure. During the pandemic, I was working for a trade association at the time as the director of marketing. And we were working really hard to ensure that those businesses so it's the laundry business. And had to work really hard to make sure that was one of those essential businesses, which was really tough to lobby for that. And you had a lot of people that were very scared about in two places, right? One, the employers and the employees of those employers, whether or not they could stay open, and two, us in this nonprofit, whether or not we're going to be, able to withstand the storm. And at the same time, I was also doing consulting work for a variety of different businesses, and it was like, how am I going to stay open? How am I going to keep this thing going? We're certainly not an essential business if I'm selling Lucky Charms, which is one of my clients at the time. So yeah, we've had to navigate a lot of that kind of change. And Ben?
Did you really get to work with Lucky Charms?
Not that kind of Lucky Charms, Ben. But yes, being a purveyor of like spiritual goods and rabbit's feet and stuff like that. Yes, that's a whole.
And with all those Lucky Charms, we still ran into the buzzsaw of the pandemic.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really struck me, well, a couple of things that really struck me. So, Helena, just a little bit of background in terms of most of my career has been in the healthcare industry writ large. The last 10, 15 years doing a lot of consulting with pharma, biotech, med device companies. And so a lot of them are obviously not going to close in the midst of a pandemic. They just have to figure out very quickly, how do we keep manufacturing life-saving medicines for people? And so you had this really weird shift where a lot of companies in healthcare in general tend to be very conservative in the sense that they need to stay very true to processes and the way they manufacture things, the way they sell things. It's all very regulated. And so trying to adapt that mentality of a very just slow moving, conservative, risk averse profile to a world where now you can't have people in the same space, or you don't know how to have people in the same space, because that was very early on in the pandemic. And yet you still have to manufacture drugs or make medical devices to keep people safe and alive and things like that. And so it was this really weird kind of dynamic. And one of the things that struck me was that so many of these companies almost on a dime flipped from where it was everybody had to be in the office, everybody had to be at work, to only essential people had to be at work, the folks that really worked on the floor manufacturing things or making a given drug. And all the other people, they were very quickly said, just stay home. work from home, work remote, we'll figure out the best way to do that. And so it was like this new muscle that all these organizations had to figure out, how do you exercise in terms of, you've been in the office with people your whole career or your whole time on staff at this organization. How now do you interact with people over a screen? And how do you do that while some of your colleagues are in the office? And this was before we'd figured out hybrid environments and have figured out how the difference in communication needs to be much more thoughtful and intentional when you're doing that over a Zoom or a TV screen, in terms of how do you connect with each other? How do you listen and hear? It's very different. And so it was just a very quick pivot. And I was so impressed that so many of these organizations were not just willing to, but really dove in and said, we're going to figure out how to make it work. We're going to really do as much as we can to keep our people safe, to keep our operations running, but then make it so that it was almost like we'd been doing it for our whole careers and it wasn't this weird kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think that jump to today, where we're still having a real challenge of what does this look like when there is a
Yeah.
bunch of people who have never worked 8 to 6 in the office 5 days a week and can't understand why now maybe they're being even back 3 days, and trying to understand, because there are people that physically in the office is important, and then there are others where maybe it's not. And I think that is a really difficult equation that leadership is trying to solve right now. Do you have any
Right.
any
Right.
thoughts on that?
Well, maybe I'll jump in real quick, and I'd love to get both of your reactions. And one of the things I've seen is, since we've shifted to this, most of the people I work with are hybrid or remote. And so since we've really gone double down on that, I've noticed that people are sending messages at all hours of the night. They're responding to questions. They're on almost all the time. And I feel like it's very few folks that I've worked with that have been very intentional about saying, you know what, I will get back to you in 24 hours, or I work in this time zone. These are my normal hours. I will get back to you during my normal hours. If it's an emergency, call 911 like you would anything. But it's that kind of thing where very few people, and I think people are still trying to figure that art out of balance between being there, being connected, being on all the time, and the expectation that they should be or shouldn't be. I still see people struggling with that quite a bit. And I'm curious if either of you have seen ways that people have navigated that really gracefully.
I hear people wishing they were back in the early 90s and we didn't even have cell phones and you had a pager. That's the truth. Really, we have people in text threads
Yeah, I know.
overnight,
With these things all the time, it's, you don't unplug anymore. It's a
right?
very different mind state.
For sure.
And then when you do unplug or go into a meeting where you literally cannot be checked, like on a podcast where you're not checking your phone, and then you get off it and there's 50 texts in one text chain and you're like, holy hecker, I'm so behind. Oh, what's
Right.
that? What's that? And yeah, it's
Right.
very
Right.
difficult. Yes, that is definitely one of the challenges that people are still, I even just Friday, I was coaching a leader and she was saying, oh, I responded to this email. It was 9 o'clock at night, but I wanted to respond because I didn't want people to feel like that I wasn't going to respond. And then, but now I feel like maybe I shouldn't have responded. And then they responded back. So then I felt like I had to respond back. And it really just,
And if
Yeah.
that person's the leader, it carries extra weight, because now all of a sudden, oh, the boss is working Friday at 9 at night. So yeah, if I want my job, maybe I need to be too. And it's all that signaling. It just gets really twisted very
exactly.
quickly.
That's what I said to her. I said, there are two pieces to this. A, do not knee jerk respond to this situation. And B, it's 9 o'clock. What are you doing? You've got a family, relax. God forbid you've had a glass of wine. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I was just going to say, just enjoy your wine, enjoy binge watching whatever you're watching on
Right.
TV.
Yeah. So there's definitely some boundary issues. But I think see, the challenge more, I think, is the communication breakdown. We already have challenges to communicate. There's a lot of different perspectives in the workplace now. And to navigate that, when we are so used to being behind a screen or on a phone and texting, so often I'm saying to people, you need to pick up the phone, go and can you go down the hall and speak to that person? And so just those habits and those behaviors that were much more intuitive pre-pandemic, where you were in the same office and you're used to all sitting in the same room for a meeting, aren't as intuitive anymore. And my whole the work that I do is typically when people have breakdowns in communication and there's a lack of trust, and how do you build that back up? And the value of being human to human it's extreme.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Rich and I have had some pretty good conversations about being a lot more intentional and thoughtful in creating that person to person connection, thinking about ways to put the person first and then get into the work, or have reminders that whoever you're working with, maybe a colleague, but for sure is another person, and maybe a mom or a dad or a spouse or a partner, whoever, they have their own lives. And just always reminding ourselves that there is a person there, and maybe they're having a really good day, or maybe they're not having such a great day, but you have to keep that in mind. And that whatever the work thing is, there's probably 7 things on their plate that are high. And a lot of the folks that I'm sure you both work with have probably 7 or 10 things that are all high priority, all due tomorrow, all non-negotiable. They have to get things done. And it's really a question of, how do you enter that conversation? How do you give people a little bit of space and some grace to get what you need and get your initiative done? And it's just so delicate. But at least Rich and I have talked a little bit about this intentionality and thoughtfulness of it. And Helene, I'm curious if that resonates with you and maybe some of the clients you work with, or Rich, if that makes sense, or am I just
No,
spinning smoke over here?
I'm going to jump in, Rich. I'll let you go jump in a minute. But yes, because the care that's required to, it's easy to frame it up that, oh, everyone's just so sensitive, just get on with your job. And I think that's not helpful, as opposed to seeing yourself, I'm a leader. My job is to create a space for this person to thrive and
Yeah.
bring their human capital, their potential to the table. And so my job is to find out what's getting in your way, and what can I do to minimize the friction, the stress in the environment. And maybe that is something that's happening at home, because there's a lot of us with a lot of things that are going on, and it's okay to actually acknowledge that this person has a sick kid and they're struggling right
Mm-hmm.
now because the partner's traveling, and this is a moment, and how can I support you? What can we do? Guess what? We have this benefit, or whatever it is, but it's coming at it rather than, oh, stop complaining, but how can I help you? How can I minimize? My job is to get your stress out of the way. And I think that coming at it like that is a lot more productive than coming at it from, for God's sake, why is everybody just sensitive?
Needy. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our other partner and co-host on the podcast talks a lot about, and wrote actually a white paper available on our website on psychological safety. To be able to have the to be able to, and we talk about communication in relation to that a lot, where we need to be able to be open to feedback and hear what other people in the organization have to say about how they're feeling. We as humans have a need to express how we feel, and we need to do so in a way that is healthy and productive. But we also need to be able to have a feedback loop that allows leaders to take that in without themselves getting defensive and, even potentially becoming retaliatory about
Mm.
it. And that's a tough balance, but it's super important. And the research out there supports that as well. That
Mm-hmm.
having that kind of
Yeah.
that level of psychological safety, and having the something called POS, which means something completely different to some other people, but perceived organizational support, as opposed to my 1990 car, which was a different kind of POS altogether. But perceived organizational support is super important, right, to the psychological well-being of people in the workplace. And that is a key. It's one of those 2024 top concerns of employers, right, from the Society of Human Resources Management. So
The
we need to be
concern
much more
and the concern of
of
being,
the well-being of employees.
It's almost like leaders now, Rich, you were talking about going back 10 years or so, or before the pandemic, anyways. And it seems like leaders back then, Helene, you said it great in terms of moving roadblocks, removing obstacles. And back then it was like, okay, how do I get you the funding you need? Or how do I clear off other tasks from your plate? And now it's almost like leaders need to be mentors, coaches, but also mental wellness coaches, or at least mental wellness aware facilitators. And yeah, it's like you were saying, removing roadblocks is not just the people, process, technology roadblocks that you typically would see at work, but it's also all of the other stuff in your life so that you're able to bring your full self to work.
and
That's a huge shift for leadership. And I don't, Rich, you and me and Cheryl were talking a little bit about training and what training leaders get in terms of emotional intelligence. We did some of that in our MBA program, but in terms of how do you really be a good leader in terms of mental wellness, in terms of that whole perspective, I haven't seen a lot of training in that. And I'm curious if that's stuff that you both have seen in any programs as well. And are we training new leaders or upskilling existing leaders and becoming that better type of leader?
so if you think about the change in the workforce and how 20 years ago, the people that were really in leadership roles were, you didn't have to worry about getting things off their plate, what's going on at home. They typically would have a partner who was
Mm-hmm.
running the show, who was making it so they could be at work at 7 a.m. in the morning and come home at 7 p.m. And they still had the bills. Someone was paying the bills and doing the shopping and taking care of the children and making sure everything was happening at school and all of that other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That now we've got such a different demographic that there isn't somebody else taking care of all that stuff. We're taking care of all of it.
Right.
And so
Right.
there's that. And then I want to go back to what you said about training about mental health. And this is something that I think it is just the fundamental piece of, you were saying, Rich, about feeling the employees feeling like they needed to be heard and being able to really feeling like they need to be able to express themselves. But what I hear when you say that is they need to feel like they're genuinely being heard. They're not just talk and nobody's listening, because if you do that, they just keep talking at you. And
Sure.
it's actually being able to really hear them. And the challenge to that, when you're a leader today and you've got so much going on, you're dealing with so much. It's not just like I just said, you're not just being able to be at work and do your stuff. You're taking care of so much stuff that you're overwhelmed. So when someone comes to you and says, "Oh, my kid, this and that," you feel like saying, "Let me tell you about my 3 kids and this and that. And I got all this. I've said, God, you've just got one kid. You want to go there." And so it's difficult for the leader to listen until they themselves feel like they're being heard. So that's the piece that needs to be put in place, I think, as leader. And as a leader, it's very difficult to actually really genuinely express yourself because you're in a leadership role. And who do you express yourself to? Not usually your peers, because you're in that position. You can't go express yourself down. So facilitating those conversations, and that's what I find I do a lot when I meet with leaders, is really hearing their experience and then feeling, "Oh, okay, I got that. Yeah, I feel like finally I've been heard."
Somebody
And
It's that
heard me.
validation. Yeah.
it puts them in a position where they can now listen and hear what's happening for their employees.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the, I've had business coaches and I find a lot of value in that because look, they're not therapists, right? That's not the role, right? The role is to help them help you solve your problems. But boy, is it helpful when you can say, okay, here's my list of issues. Let me tell you what's going on here to an impartial third party that arguably doesn't have the stake in the company. They have a stake in your success, but they don't have a role within the company. So there's this impartiality there that it's almost like the dispassionate researcher, because you want to have Like when you have in science, you want to have a researcher that doesn't care about the outcome of what this experiment is, right? It's going to be this outcome or that outcome, depending on the hypothesis, whatever happens, right? Otherwise, you get what's called harking, which is hypothesis after known results. And the results are known. And that's a big issue. And we see a lot of that in business. Whereas a coach that comes in and is able to listen and be impartial and just says, okay, look, I see where you're going with this. How can you change your situation? There's a lot of value in that kind of service.
It's being neutral doesn't mean you don't care.
Right.
You're just neutral. And
Right.
so you're not advocating for this person to suffer or this person to, you do want them to succeed. You want the human to, but you're not invested in the outcome. You're a human being who's able to listen from a place of care
Yeah.
and want what's best for that person. And you're not advocating for the company or a particular outcome. And
Right.
so that is, and then, so that I think is beautiful for a leader to have somebody like that. And then the accountability piece. So it's the care and the accountability that's so valuable in that relationship.
And if you're a business owner, who are you accountable to other than yourself?
Yeah. Yeah.
But when you have that piece, that third party piece, now you have somebody that's going to hold you accountable.
Yeah. I was speaking with my coach on yesterday and she's, so what are your boundaries around homework with the kids? And I was like, geez. Like, I just hope they get it done. I don't know. And if they don't, I put them in like after summer school. Like, but so I'm like, okay, so I need to get better there. That's something I need to improve on. But it wasn't until like she asked me that question, and I'm like, geez, I guess I should have real boundaries around homework, but I haven't had the bandwidth to do that. So now I need to do that.
But the communication style there was not, here's what you're doing, and here's what you should be doing. It's asking a question, getting clarity, and allowing the person to get the clarity on their own,
Yeah.
which is very impactful. And we internalize that psychologically.
And guiding you to an answer, and not necessarily the answer or having some perfect answer, but this idea that we've talked about in terms of corporate transformations, this idea of having people co-create the change or bringing them into where you want to get to and giving them some agency and authority in terms of getting to that place. It seems like a similar approach in terms of you working with your coach and having that sort of, let me just put this out there. Here's something we might want to work towards. How do you think we should get there? What do you think it could look like? And maybe it's going to look different in 6 months or in a year, or maybe after 2 weeks, we realize, well, that's not working. I better start taking away my kids' Cheerios or probably Lucky Charms if we're thinking cereal here. But we're gonna make them eat shredded wheat until they get their homework done, and then back to the Lucky Charms. But it's just a very different approach. It's not the
We need you
coming
to
down from on high.
the outcome.
Yeah.
This is what it looks like. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, with all your knowledge and expertise, let's try and come up with a little case study of, let's say we've got a team and there's a breakdown. Let's say the leadership has not been creating accountability within the team. So situations have been allowed to sort of fester and the trust, there is not a lot of psychological safety. Let's say we're feeling like we're walking on eggshells and now we're in there working with this team and this leader to develop the psychological safety. Have you got some tips and tricks and ideas on how you would approach a situation like that?
I do, Ben.
Yeah. Do you want to start and then I can jump in?
I think, because I had a similar situation with a client not too long ago, where there's a lot of, if you don't do this, then you're out, right? There's that kind of thing, right? That happened. And then we couldn't figure out why people weren't adopting this. In this case, it was a piece of software, right? People just checked out, right? They just weren't going to have any part of this, right? The first thing was to find out what the blocks were, right? So you got to gather data And gathering data came in the form of a couple of things. One, looking at how people were engaging within the software itself, right? So that gives us some feedback about what user adoption is and how people were reacting within it. And then actually taking people aside and having conversations with them about how they felt about work, how much training they felt they had, whether they felt that they were adequately prepared to use this piece of software, right? So it started there.
A question. Did
Yeah.
people self-select into those conversations, or were they selected? How did you choose?
That's a great question. And in this case, smaller company, they did not self-select. And it's one of the parts of industrial organizational psychology that makes the ethics a little blurry because it's assumed that when you're in the organization, you've opted into being part of the study, right? So this is where that came in. So that was a challenge here to make people feel like it's okay for us to talk about this now, right? Because this is what I'm brought in for. This is what I'm supposed to do, and we're okay. So, and I took the aggregate data and put that into the report for the owner, where it was hard for her to take that feedback, right? It was like, oh, it's partially me,
Oh,
right? It was not entirely, but that was I remember that this owner actually, in a separate conversation, said it, you could see the frustration that, oh man, this is not what I was expecting.
right.
How can we get past this? But I think, again, I think it all starts with some data collection to begin with.
So then how did you get her buy-in? What was that conversation like?
Yeah, that conversation was, you can continue to do it this way, or you need to actually be part of the adoption process too. That was another part, right? Was, I don't want to use this. I don't want to be part of this. I just want other people to do it. So there was you have to model the way. That's the leadership challenge, as a 5 steps to the leadership challenge. One of those is model the way. The other one, another part of it, is empowering others. So having those people that were resistors to change, right?
Mhm.
To give them some voice and to allow them to help shape what became a training regimen that we did for them to help build their self-efficacy, to allow them to have some say in that and be part of the shared decision-making process. That instilled some support from the business owner, because she was like, yes, we can. Okay, we're going to co-create this and we're going to make this work, and everybody's going to get involved in it. It's not just a top-down thing, right? It became more of a collaborative process in the end, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
We're still not out of the woods on this project, by the way. There's still some things going on there. It's much better. It's gotten so much better since then.
It takes time to build that trust. It's not like you just go and do a training and now we're all just going to adopt it and be fine.
Yeah.
It's those little things that you do on an ongoing basis that get you to that place where you have the trust.
Right.
Yeah, that's great, Rich. It sounds like that encapsulates a lot of the stuff we've been talking about today in terms of honesty and speaking truth to, there is something going on, and do you want to improve it, or do you want to just let it perpetuate, and having that kind of conversation, but then also inviting people in to figure out how to get it better and how to improve things, and having the right kinds of conversations at the right time with the right people in terms of small one-on-ones or small group discussions or that kind of thing, and listening to concerns and helping that leader stay focused on the why. We talk a lot about clarifying the why in very simple terms, not being jargony or anything like that, but just, why are we here? What are we doing? What is our main purpose? And
Sure.
getting people to rally around that can be very powerful.
Now, If I can ask a quick question here of Ben, because our experience is different. I've worked with small businesses most of my career, where Ben's worked with Fortune 500 companies. Ben, have you seen a difference in trying to make these changes?
Conceptually, it's very similar in terms of approach, in terms of ways that you might look to style a conversation or ways that you might look to change a situation. In terms of differences, it seems compared to some of the smaller groups that I've worked with, bigger companies are just a lot slower moving. And maybe again, that's because I'm in a relatively conservative industry. Maybe it's because it's just a large organization and it just takes time for things to happen. In a small company, you can be on the phone with someone and then the next day changes. And in a larger company, sometimes you can be on the phone with someone and then it takes 2 weeks just to get a meeting on their calendar. And so it's just like a whole mindset shift in terms of what is our window looking like. We're still going to have the same type of change arc, if you will, but is it just going to be like a little mini rainbow, or is it going to be one of those really long, drawn out rainbows? That's a different sort of thing. And so that's one of the bigger differences in terms of smaller companies, bigger companies. I think sometimes smaller companies, it's easier to know who your people are and what their particular approaches are, what their bugaboos are. Whereas in a bigger company, maybe you don't know all the people as well. Maybe there are just so many more people that you have, instead of onesie twosies that are hesitant or resistant to a change. Now it's like you have dozensies and dozensies that are resistant to a change. And so it's just trying to grapple that. And so instead of having a very individualized change approach, it's a little bit, you can customize it, but it's customized to a target audience or a target group, as opposed to Bob or Jane or Bill or Susan, right? It's using those as archetypes as opposed to actual individuals.
Yeah, yeah.
But a lot of the rest of it, the approach, if you're going to, in my experience, anyways, and this is like an N of one, so take it for what it's worth, it's still a lot of the same things. You, as an external consultant, like you were saying, Helena, you still have to be willing to go in and say, there's something going on here. Do you want to explore this? Is this of value to you? Does this look like it's going to be important to solve so that it can get you to where you want to be in a less churny kind of way? If so, if the leader you're working with is savvy enough to say, yeah, let's approach this, or if it's just, nope, I need a different way to tell my people to just get the dang thing done, then maybe you have to approach it a little differently, where you might approach it in a softer way or a harder way. Those are just the parameters, and that's where a lot of that realistic approach comes in. What are you working with? Who are you working with? What kind of time frame do you have? What kind of budget do you have? That kind of thing. If it's like a regulatory change that's going to get implemented on January 1st, because that's what the government says, sometimes that's a real motivating factor, because there's no leeway. Either you meet that need or you stop selling. And then that's bad for the business and
Yeah, yeah.
arguably for the company and their constituents, their clients.
So the work that I focus on is the people piece. And yes, when it's a small company, it's very easy to say Harold needs to go there or whatever that is. But when it's a larger company, it does go slower. And what I would love is to be able to motivate leaders to go faster when it comes to people. Because when you're that person in that situation, it's a daily grind, and it's
Sure.
very difficult to come back from the trauma that's created over a long period of time of being the bodies. Like, they're literally, I was talking earlier about my personal experience, and I moved on, and there's at least another 1, 2, 3, 4 bodies after me that had the
They've stayed
yeah,
there, yeah.
that have quit because it got so toxic that
Oh,
3 people have quit and got other jobs, and 4 people are out on health leave, and so 7, and so I wrote a letter to the CHRO and said, this is what's happening in this team. It's not getting surfaced because the leader is managing the narrative, but this is what's happening, and nothing was done. And I wish that there was a way for these to be like, hey, you've got a month. You've got a month before this implodes, like before these people are irreparably damaged. Can we fix this in the next month? It's not about adopting something. It's about acknowledging this is what's happening and sitting down and dealing with it. And
Sure.
that is something that I do struggle with the bigger companies, because it's getting everybody.
That alignment can be really hard, especially when it seems like there might be an unwillingness to change that one sticky wicket, which is causing a lot of issues downstream. And that can be hard to suss out. Like, why don't we just address this one concern here? Maybe there's reasons, but if those aren't transparent, that's really tough for you as a third party coming in.
And I think sometimes it has to do with people having to acknowledge that they were part of the problem. And that's a really difficult, like what you were just saying,
It's a hard pill to swallow for sure.
Rich, about that software but not being adopted. She doesn't want to adopt it
Yeah.
herself. So there's
Right.
that.
For sure. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
can't help but to think 7 people, the brain drain that happens when you have
It's a
that
lot of
amount of
people.
knowledge.
Yeah.
Because human capital theory says that the value that the value of the company derives from the people that work from it, right? And that value is borrowed from the people as long as they're there. If they're not there, the company is not borrowing that value and using that value as capital to gain revenue, right? So 7 people out is a huge, and I think there's a motivating factor for the executives, business owner, and the like too, is how is this hitting the top line revenue and the bottom line? Because that's really, honestly, that's from a business perspective, that's where a lot of that goes, right?
Right.
That's the concern,
Right.
right? But yeah, and so it's when those people are not there contributing to the value of the company, your stock kind of just decreased.
Well, the impact of those 7 people not doing their job, and that was like a 10-person team, that function isn't functioning.
It's not functioning. Woo, you got 3 people doing the job
That's
of 10,
crazy.
huh?
And
Yeah.
something that Rich, you and Cheryl have brought up before is this idea that so much of a company's internal brand is now public. It's transparent because you have lots of websites where people will talk about their corporate culture, or they'll talk about what's good about a company, what's bad about a company. And that openness and transparency kind of is good when you want to attract the right people, but it can be problematic for a company that has these kinds of issues where now all of a sudden their dirty laundry is hanging out for all to see, and you've got 7 people who are no longer there or doing their best work for that company. Are you going to have 7 people who want to come backfill? It's going to be harder to find those 7 people. Or if you do, are they going to be authentically bringing their best selves to work? Or are they going to come in knowing, I just got to show up with my mask on, do my thing, and not any extra little finger lift I'm not going to do? And that's just super toxic for the rest of them. You think of the network effect of this group of 7 that's struggling here, and the 3 that are left, my gosh, those people must feel like they've got the weight of the world.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Um, yeah.
Gallup puts out a state of the global workforce report. I think it's in June every year. And so you have people that are out, right, in that part. But then there's still the people who are engaged. And it's only 20 something percent of people who actually feel like they're fully engaged in the job. And that's on a global scale. So
That's crazy.
yeah, it's a huge problem.
But that kind of resonates, Helena, with your
Well,
27%, 30% of the 3 of the
well,
7 left.
what was crazy about the situation was that we were a really engaged, high functioning team. Like we were a group, we are all still really close, but the leadership was really devastating. And the cost to the company, we have a lawsuit. Like there's a lawsuit there with all of these people that got sick, had all this stuff. And it was just a terrible, punitive, badly managed environment. But this could cost the company millions of dollars. And it really, all it would have taken was hiring a neutral outsider to come in, have a conversation with each person on the team, find out what's going on, sit down and say, hey, we've got a skill set missing over here. This is, and let's go forward. And that
Right.
situation would be thriving. And because that was not an option, that was not done like that, they used an internal person. They used an internal person to do an investigation. And somebody, one of the leaders who was above the toxic person, suddenly disappeared.
Uh-oh.
That was the outcome of the investigation. And she really had nothing to do with it. But she just 2 weeks and she was gone and still on payroll for the next 9 months. It's such a bad situation.
Wow.
But I just,
There's some good stories in there.
Yeah. And I probably shouldn't tell too many, just in case. But anyway, that situation in itself just has taught me so much about how challenging these environments are and what's required to help people navigate through them, and the value to the company of the psychological safety, and how when you've got engaged people, they don't need micromanaging. You need to just get out of their way. Like I said, minimize the obstacles and let them go. Any final words before we drop off here?
If you don't mind, just saying,
Plug your podcast.
If we could hype the podcast, that'd be great. You can find us at www.harmoniousworkplaces.com. You don't have to say www anymore. Right?
No, people know. Harmonious.
Whatever, everybody knows. But harmoniousworkplaces.com. We have our podcast. We have blogs. That's also our consulting site. But a couple of things that I think that the listeners might find really interesting and helpful in their organizations is we have the psychological safety white paper that we have available for free for download. Just go there, sign up, and you get it. Ben put together a really nice, very simple 4-part, right? Ben, 4-part change management framework, which is easy to use. It makes a lot of sense. And there's a recent blog on the site about that, but you can just go there, drop down menu, you'll find it there. And if you have any questions about your organizational culture, we also have a scorecard that's a very quick, I can't tell you, maybe it takes a couple of minutes to do, but you'll get your results instantly. It's our organizational culture scorecard. So give that a try too.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's at
Rich, I know that you and Cheryl also like to share that we offer an assessment for companies as well if they want to dig a little deeper in terms of understanding what's going on and ways they might tackle a given situation.
Absolutely.
But I think a lot of the stuff is just at the end of the day, it seems like, Helena, it's really just about treating other people as humans and helping them bring their best self to work in a way that you would help your child or help a loved one bring their best selves to a home environment or a school environment. And so it's being willing to be honest and have guardrails and boundaries, but also being willing to help them in a thoughtful way, think through how do we want to get to where we want to be? And at the end of the day, why are we doing this? And always just coming back to that why. And if it's not working, let's figure out a different way to do it rather than just beating our heads against the wall, hoping something's going to change.
Yep.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, both of you, for spending this time with me. And
thank you for having us. This has been super fun.
I loved it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. So I'm putting a pause there, but I'm not going to stop recording. I know it's 12 o'clock. Do you guys have another 10 minutes?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure.
Question that I may or may not go on the podcast because I'm meeting, at 12:30. So in half an hour, I'm meeting with, opened the wrong thing, with the CEO of a hospital that I'm consulting at right now.
Oh, good for you.
And
that's great.
That's Ben's
Ben's down there. Ben's over here for me.
He's over there for you. Okay.
It's like this whole Brady Bunch thing.
Right.
So I'm having a meeting with the CHRO, CEO, and the head of another department to discuss the results of a similar situation to what you shared, Rich, where my colleague and I went in and we spoke to everybody, found out 2 teams really in a lot of conflict. There'd been an investigation by a person from one team felt like she was getting singled out, microaggressed, bullied. And so there was an investigation, and the findings were that she wasn't being harassed, but there was microaggression and she was being treated differently. And by the majority of the people on this other team. She's a woman of color. They're women who are more educated and in just a higher role, but they work in collaboration. And there is oversight from them with her role. That group were traumatized. They were sat down, they were told, y'all are the villains. And that felt like, we've been victimized by this woman for the last 8 years, be the way she treats us. And so anyway, we go and we find out that this situation has been going on for 8 years. There's a lot of history here. People have been at this place for a very long time, and it has been so badly managed. Nobody has managed it, basically. Things have been allowed to fester. There's been no accountability. And then the communication between both the leaders of the two teams and the HR has been so broken that this team they thought they were told to write up all of their interactions with this other individual. So it did look like very petty, micro managing. Like, it looked terrible. They were made to look very petty. They were documenting everything. There were a couple of complaints against her that were unsubstantiated. Then they had a PIP. They had to write up a PIP about her, and they got these women to write the PIP, not there was just this whole big breakdown between what was actually being said, what was being shared, all of this. And it really comes down to a real lack of leadership here and a lack of accountability in HR.
Yeah.
So we went in, we've had a couple of really intense situations, conversations facilitated between both groups, smaller groups, one-on-ones. And we've got it to a really good place with everybody. This team now feel heard. They don't
It's fantastic.
This team they feel really heard. They feel they're ready to move on. This one she was told things like, you need to do more eye contact and be more friendly, smile more. But what it was that when she experienced any kind of like stress or anything negative, she just shuts down and stops talking to people.
Sure.
And so it was more of an energetic thing they were trying to address using the wrong language. And she was given no feedback. The only feedback she had was 2 years ago, she had a report that said, her review said, you're increasing stress in between teammates by the communication, having lots of back and forth. That could not be her fault. What does that even mean? I'm trying to understand the situation. And then this last year, they didn't even give her a review. They just submitted an empty review. So there's nothing in writing. So this woman, and now she has a lawsuit, the EEOC. She's suing. We don't know exactly what's going on there, but there's that. But a huge piece of it is her leader has mismanaged the situation so badly that she's created a lot of this. And then the old leader on this other team has left. A new leader's come in. She's fantastic. She's actually promoted up. She's fabulous. Love her, working with her. She's working well with this other person here. This person reached out to her on her own and had a meeting with her yesterday, was very positive. Everything's good. And then we're meeting with the CHRO today, the CEO today, to say, we think that this team needs to come under this team, come under this leader. There needs to be one leader. I think there's a structural issue. These two leaders with these two groups that work very closely together, and these people don't communicate. This person needs to be moved off. She doesn't even know what they do. She doesn't even know how to get into the system to see the notes they're writing up. Like, she's not managing at all. So we need to find a way to move her off and then move this team under here. But my question, how do we structure this to not look like it's the worst decision in organizational history to put a woman who's got a lawsuit against this group, and there was a legal investigation that showed that she was being microaggressed by this group, and now we're going to move her underneath this and work with this group? But I think that is the answer. That is the only way. This is going to work beautifully once this comes together. And I can see,
It sounds like the new person in the, I'd call it the offending group, right? The group that was the bullying group. The new person who's in charge of this has been able to build some trust not only within that group, but also within the other group. Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
So
both groups love her.
yeah, I think you're making a really good decision there because her ability to garner support from both of those groups should help to I can't say it's going to be mending the relationship. There's the old adage of you have the boy who put all the nails in a fence and then he took all the nails out. What's left? A bunch of holes, right? So you've got a lot of scarring that's here that they're gonna have to work with. And if the lawsuit's against the organization, it's incumbent upon the organization to the burden of proof is on the organization, right? That nothing has happened, and the fact is that's going to be difficult. But I think that person that you have there that has those skills and your feedback, I think you're on the right track here. It's unknown to how this is going to play out, but I would wholly endorse here without knowing all the scope of this. You know,
It seems like there's a good opportunity to build trust. If it's all under the same organizational umbrella,
right.
it seems like bringing two
Mm.
groups together might help if there's some intentionality about it and cross working, cross training, sharing of things. It seems like it may help engender a little bit of trust. And overall, Rich is absolutely right. It's going to be tough at first, but over a longer time span, there may be bridges being built and scar tissue can heal over in such a way that these two teams, and in particular this one woman who's feeling singled out, might start to realize that there's a better path forward, that there's less wrong than right, and a lot of that can just be left in the past and people can point to a way forward. What I'm One of the things that's, I don't know, just I'm super curious about is you had a leader that was totally checked out and maybe not the right person for that situation. That person is out now, it sounds, and there's this new person that's in that everybody really likes and everybody trusts. And it seems like this person is saying the right things and doing the right things. And what happens when that person inevitably gets promoted up or gets hired to another company because everybody wants those types of people to work for them? Will that new structure be able to withstand that kind of a change and have another person come into that role and still have that new structure be that new trustful, open, sort of safe, psychologically safe environment? If so, then I think that's the right play.
Yeah, I think that is the right play. I think the wrong play would be this. There was somebody else in that role that didn't communicate with this one that's the one that's checked out.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And she left and this woman got promoted here.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the wrong play would be replacing this person, because I think it's the actual structure,
Mm.
having two leaders in this group that really is very collaborative and needs to work like this with one leader.
Mm-hmm.
I think that by doing that, fixing the structure, this is the right person to do that. And then the repair will happen. And then if she does leave, the next person to come in will have a functioning unit.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes
And I
sense.
Can
think
you?
that, yeah,
Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think there's a chance that doing this will weed some people out. Will weed some, there's some dynamics that I don't know whether they're repairable,
Mm-hmm.
but they're going to allow to exist if it stays like this. And I think it's better that they don't exist. They either get over it, stop talking shit.
Mm-hmm.
But
Is there I don't know how the dynamics of their work groups work, but is there a way of having, so if you're bringing the two groups together, is there a way of having some kind of a town hall meeting or some other kind of group activity where they're all together and working together, maybe even in your randomized work groups, that they can help to decide what the new normal is going to be?
yeah, I think that's the conversation. I'm going to put this out there, and then it's the next piece is like, how do we facilitate it? I think we'll get
Right.
buy-in, But I think that the leader, I think she's going to need ongoing support. HR
Sure.
have zero trust with this group. So I think keeping Tina and myself engaged will
Right.
be helpful. I feel like everybody on both teams is reaching out to us and feels they can trust. This one group, they're like, oh my God, it feels like it's the first time a normal person has sat down and actually listened to us.
Oh my
It's the
gosh.
first
There's
time
the value of the
being
third
heard.
party coming in and
Yeah.
Or just
having that.
like you just said, I think that's going to be super important as you go forward and try to get this new structure set up, is just letting everyone know that you are listening to them, that the new leader is listening, that there's ways to share opinions and perspectives that won't get retaliated on, and give sort of a grace period for things to bubble up, that it is going to be difficult conversations, and let people have that space and time to allow those things to surface, and then say, we've got it, we've heard you, we're going to really work together to make this a better situation, knowing that at the end of the day, we want a structure that will help us serve our patients, help patients stay healthy, help patients stay safe when they come into our hospital, things like that, and just keep it focused on that bigger picture. And the more you can keep, whether it's that other person who's checked out, or HR or other players that are just not adding value to the situation and maybe even making it worse, the more you can keep those distant as that third party, I think you have a good opportunity to say, let's leave, we'll bring those folks in later, but for now, let's just keep this a little bit tighter, because we already have enough churn as it is.
Okay, thank you. That was really helpful.
You have to let us know how it goes.
Yeah, please.